We, frankly, unalterably oppose the practice of human sacrifice. And we even have our doubts about the system that requires it. Let me explain a little what I mean by that. Every one of you by now will have read of the recent human sacrifice that took place in Florida. Actually, it turned rather disagreeably in the eyes and points of view of some liberal commentators into an immolation. It was unpleasant. There was the stench of burning flesh, repulsive to the nose. There was the flash of flame behind the mask, appalling to the eye. Mr. Medina's last few seconds can't be measured exactly, but they don't seem to have been very civilized as a means of exiting the society. The flames and the stench, I would say, are more or less routine. I don't want to dwell on them. The jaunty warders and governors of prisons in Florida have called that machine Old Sparky in their charming way, for good reasons, for a long time, to show who's in charge. That's why they do it. And I've seen worse myself. If you've ever been to the cyanide chamber in Parchman, Mississippi, you can say you've seen worse. And the most remarkable thing about these procedures, including the banalized, medicalized system now being preferred that degrades the medical and physician profession, the worst thing about it actually is how calmly it's received. In Arkansas the other day, they executed 3 guys at one go. One guy had to lie on a gurney with the drip in his arm for an hour and a half while Clarence Thomas debated whether he should live or die. And the statement made by the prison governors afterwards was, well, it's cheaper to do it in batches. It saves the state some money. Also, it saves on stress among the staff. This is what it means to have a therapeutic society. This is also what it means if you give someone like Clarence Thomas the power of life and death. We, on this side of the House, do not grant him that right.
Welcome, fellow plebs. My name is Sean, and this is
Tribunus Plebis.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Tribunus Plebis podcast. Today, we have a super positive and happy subject, the death penalty. I know, it's not the most joy-inducing subject around, but it's a subject I want to delve into a little bit. The death penalty is back in the news this year because Attorney General William Barr, who just resigned, reinstated the cruel act at the federal level after a 17-year hiatus. And listen, I have to tell you something here. This presidential administration and the ghouls with which it is being staffed is a deeply sick and immoral cancer on this country. This spate of executions is just the latest in a long line of cruelty which is being performed merely for cruelty's sake. How sick does a group of people have to be to make it a priority to fast-track executions? I mean, really, folks, it's one thing to sit there and say, well, this is the law of the land, the person was given a fair trial, the sentence was legally handed down by the judge and jury, and we solemnly do what we have to when the time comes. And it's another thing to gleefully supercharge the process and cram in as many executions as you can because you see the end of your presidential term approaching. Trump is pushing executions even in the lame duck session, a breaking of a precedent that has lasted for 130 years. This orange-colored blowhard is trying to set a murder record from the Oval Office. Well, you know what? Let me take that back. A lot of presidents have murdered a lot of people. But if the final scheduled executions all take place, Trump will be responsible for more execution deaths than any president in over 100 years. And he will have done it all in less than a year. Just over 8 months, actually. And yes, I know some of you are saying, Trump didn't kill these people. I say Trump did kill these people. He could have picked up a phone at any time and stopped all of these murders. And he didn't. He is guilty of murder. Yep, I'm saying it. He's guilty of murder through a lack of action. If all of these people were killed by the state before Biden becomes president, that will be 13 state-sanctioned murders in just 8 bloody months. Now, just to bounce back to that thought I was saying earlier about how some people will say that these people are merely doing their duty or some other rancid nonsense like that. The reality is that these murders are a series of conscious choices that people are making all along the way. These sentences aren't writs from some weird god out there that are like these inviolable things or something. Barr and Trump are simply in a rush to get more blood on their hands in some sick, twisted clout chasing in an effort to be perceived as, like tough law and order types. But really all they're doing is revealing their deeply seated immorality and that unique brand of cruelty that they possess, which is universally reserved for only the biggest cowards amongst us. Real strength, real law and order type of shit is born of morality, ethics, bravery, and compassion. 4 things which Trump and Barr completely lack in their entirety. Barr had even gone on to say that he would absolutely try to schedule even more executions before he leaves office. We've seen in the past states scramble to purchase the toxic drugs used in lethal injections because the producer of those drugs was going to stop making them. And we've seen states accelerate executions because their drug stockpile was about to expire. This sort of stuff can only be classified as twisted, evil, and, frankly, just kind of fucked up. Like, okay, you have a death penalty, and you have a person on death row scheduled to be executed in, let's just say, 12 months. Then some underling knocks on the door and tells you that the lethal injection drugs will expire soon. So what do? Do you say, okay, let's get some new stuff. Let's see if some other state has some stuff. Or do you just stomp on the accelerator? You've got 2 options. You can do your job with a little bit of humanity, or you can just flip to complete ghoul and just rush the execution. Come on. We all know what's right here, and the right thing is not to run down the hallway trying to beat the clock to murder a man. That's always the wrong answer. And now we even have Donald Trump pushing to bring back the firing squad of all things. This country is spinning into evil absurdity. Actually, let me rephrase that. It is spinning deeper into evil absurdity. The real impetus for the death penalty suddenly re-emerging in the national consciousness was the murder of Brandon Bernard this past Thursday, December 10th of 2020. A mostly online campaign had been pursued to spare Mr. Bernard's life. But the story is quite a bit shadier than simply trying to stop a killing of a defenseless human being. Bernard's trial is widely viewed as being unfairly prosecuted and poorly defended. The prosecution is accused of leaving out important evidence and sensationalizing the knowable facts in a dogged effort to get a death sentence for the then 18-year-old defendant. There's a lot in the story of Brandon Bernard, and I'm going to skip much of it here because this podcast isn't really about this one case. But the trial, conviction, and murder of Mr. Bernard does a lot to highlight the failings, legal, moral, and otherwise, of our justice system. The prosecution tried Bernard as a co-defendant with a man named Christopher Villalba. Christopher Villalba was executed earlier this year. Villalba was the man who actually murdered the couple with gunshots to their heads. The police and forensic witnesses exaggerated and sensationalized almost every aspect of the crime in their quixotic drive to take the lives of these two men. And we shouldn't pass over the fact that these were young black men accused of murdering a young white couple as we ponder this. The application of the death penalty has long been extremely racist after all. The prosecution also underplayed and actually hid evidence. While this evidence was certainly not completely exculpatory, after all, Bernard was involved with the crime. Nobody disputes this. But it almost certainly could and likely would have affected the potentiality of a death sentence. In fact, 5 of the 9 jury members have come out and said that if they had heard the evidence which was suppressed, that they would not have voted for a death penalty. And I just want to note here that this is not a defense of Mr. Bernard. The fact remains that these men, along with 2 others, were each and altogether responsible in some way or another for the brutal, cold-blooded murder of Todd and Stacy Bagley, a young couple who were visiting Texas and considering moving to the area. And this isn't some weird apologia for these boys and young men who so cruelly took these 2 lives. It's not a call for a verdict of not guilty either. This episode is about wanting to stop more murders, to stop premeditated murders of defenseless human beings by the state. And the Bernard case is just the slipway into the argument and into the zeitgeist. My original idea here was to go fairly in-depth, to provide a history of the death penalty, list some potential pros and cons, and maybe even an overview of both recent and historical court cases and precedents. I would have tackled things like how long has the death penalty existed in this country? What methods have been used throughout history and what methods are used right now? How many states have the death penalty on the books and which ones? Which states have a moratorium and why do they do that? Where is the death penalty most active? When can the death penalty be applied? And on and on. I was going to provide arguments both for and against the death penalty. Does it reduce crime? Do the victims suffer? Is it cruel, unusual, or is it both? What about the potential killing of an innocent person? Or murdering a person who is so mentally deficient that they can't even understand what they've done, let alone that their life is about to end? What about minors? Should we kill children as punishment for a crime? What if they kind of look old? What if they're about to turn that magical 18 in, say 6 months or so? How about then? 3 months? What about then? How about cop killers? And then we need to consider why we are even doing this. What is this state-sanctioned murder for? Who is it for? What is it for? Is the death penalty about vengeance? Is it about justice? Is it about closure? Or is it just a simple bloodlust perversion? Is it true deterrence devoid of prurient emotionality, or a simple exertion of power meant to tyrannize? How many innocents have been acquitted? How many years did they spend on death row? How many lives have been ruined by wrongful convictions? How many families have been destroyed by them? How many innocents have actually been murdered by the state for crimes which they did not commit? How many families were destroyed, lives ruined, and children left parentless by these murders? These are all good questions, and many of them have very good answers. However, I'm not going to provide them because those answers don't really matter to me, not in the broader argument at least, especially since these arguments rarely sway anyone at all. The realization I came to is that whatever the crime was, whatever the method used, no matter how painless, no matter how guilty the victim may be, it's simply wrong to kill people as punishment for their crimes. The crux of this whole issue for me is that taking life from another human being, outside of some pretty narrow sets of circumstances, things like, self-defense, defending another person, stuff like that, it's morally wrong. No amount of data or analyzation of legal minutia can override the simple fact that the state should not be killing its citizens. Not for punishment, nor closure, nor even a misguided societal drive for revenge. We could spend days, weeks, or even years going round and round as we argue whether capital punishment reduces violent crime. And we have. This argument goes right back to the founding of this country. We could share pie charts and bar graphs and anecdotes. I could provide dozens of names of death row inmates who have been completely and utterly acquitted and entirely freed from prison. A death penalty proponent could provide dozens of gruesome stories of the most violent, unrepentant criminals in history, and the stories of their victims as counterpoints. We could even cite the numerous stats and studies that point to the fact that the death penalty has historically been used to lynch black people as a racist stand-in for extrajudicial murder. And we could also point to the numerous stats and studies which show that the death penalty is racist to this very day. And we would get nowhere with it. History is proof of that, I think. And some might ask this. They might ask, but doesn't that violent, ghoulish murderer deserve to die for what they did to that innocent family? And you know what? They might deserve it. They really might. And I'll set aside the vacuousness of the arguments concerning a concept so vague as to who quote-unquote deserves what. And if I set aside those vagaries, I might even personally agree that they deserve to die. What I won't agree with is that the state should be the one to take their life, and I'm not suggesting somebody else should either. To deserve something does not mean that you are required to receive it. True monsters do exist, and they should be removed from society, not murdered by the government in cold blood as punishment for a crime. Prisons currently exist for this. They shouldn't be killing grounds. Life is a precious thing that we should hold with utmost respect. Now, one interesting question that a lot of people have asked me when we've talked or even cordially debated the concept of the death penalty is something along the lines of, what if somebody tortured, abused, raped, and brutally killed somebody you loved, maybe even a child you loved? Wouldn't you want them to die for what they did? And personally, I find this to be an interesting question when posed in good faith. It's sort of an extension of the question about deserving that I just brought up, but it makes it deeply personal in a way that I always think needs a little exploration. It is sometimes very easy to sit on the outside and talk about morality and the like, but it's another thing entirely to be in the arena, so to speak. And my answer to this sort of question is that my rage would probably want vengeance. I can't deny that there would be some part of me, and probably a very significant portion of me, that would want to see such a villain dead. But what I really, truly, and deeply hope is that in that moment, if that ever happened, I would be brave enough and strong enough to maintain my personal integrity and refuse to participate in the pursuance of a death sentence. Now, I'm a firm believer that we never really know how we will react to extreme situations. Something like a mass shooter event at a theater we are in, for example. I could sit here and tell you that I'd do all the right things and survive. But you know what? Maybe I'd just stand up and freeze. I don't know. I've never experienced anything like that before. As to the proposed question of whether or not I could hold that anti-death penalty line, I don't honestly know. And I pray to whatever higher power that may exist, for whatever good it may do, that I am never placed in that situation. And I think that's about as honest as I can be with you guys about this. The act of murder itself is a repugnant act, and murder by the state does not mollify that simple truth. No state should be imbued with or imbue itself with the right to murder its citizens. Executions are barbaric, cruel, and little more than pointless spectacles of power. Think about the fact that we currently provide the government the power to use murder as a method for manipulating society and as a tool for vengeance. Seriously, take a few seconds and really ponder that. Now take another moment to think about the fact that the government will argue vehemently to maintain this power, the power to murder as a tool for social manipulation and quote-unquote justice. Whenever I let that roll around in my head for more than a few seconds, I start to feel a little sick. Because life is so dear, we should not murder people, not even the worst amongst us, especially via state-run, premeditated show executions. A moral, just, and free society cannot have as part of it state-sanctioned murder. Those two things are as incongruous with each other as oil and water. Murder is either right or it's wrong. And I think we all know the moral and ethical answer to that question. It's time to be better. It's time to be moral. It's time to be just. It's time to be free. It is time to kill the death penalty. And that's it for the episode, guys. Thank you very much for being here. Please, if you get a chance, if you haven't followed already, follow on whatever podcast app you use. And if you have a minute, please follow the link I'm going to put in the description to Apple Podcasts. Leave a review and a rating. It's the best way to help out podcasters. So if you rate and review, it's better than almost everything else. Don't be afraid also to share on social media. And thank you very much, guys. I love you all. Thank you.